solar grazing, whether it's good or bad, that's not what I'm trying to talk about right now. It's more of the fact that it is happening. And so what can we do for the land that is solar on farmland, sheep? So I would love to hear just how the sheep grazing works. Because then before the podcast started, you also mentioned something really interesting elsewhere. To me, it sounds just a really interesting avenue to bring back sheep, but then also help graze the land and then also produce healthy meat for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have the solar grazing because it is an opportunity to access more land. We're pretty well landlocked right here. 240 acres to purchase more land makes zero financial sense. So the solar grazing has given us the opportunity to graze more acres. 240 acres here, but we graze 900 acres of solar panels that are off the farm. The opportunities there are absolutely huge in terms of scaling the U.S. sheep flock. But I don't know. I don't know that I personally care as much about the products that we produce and the industry as a whole and these commodities as much as I do of the individual farming operations. I care more about the farmers than I do about the product that is being produced, I think. And the opportunities here for us to take land, in our case, that is just commodity corn production, which in my opinion is in most cases an ecological nightmare, to replace that with ground that is going to be grazed appropriately, and to bring farmers along with that opportunity to get more access to acreage, to be able to grow their flock, to have larger flocks, more animals that they're selling, is just an absolutely huge opportunity. For us, it has been the same grazing procedures that we follow here. We're running daily moves on the solar site, fairly high utilization. We do have to mow quite significantly. In addition to that, our contract is set up so that we are the solo vegetation manager of the entire site. So if sheep can't control it alone, we have to do supplemental mowing, which in our area with that big spring flush means pretty well regardless. You're going to have to do a significant amount of mowing front loaded in the year. But I see it as an absolutely huge potential, huge opportunity for the farming operations to grow themselves and to have some diversity of income and an opportunity for the next generation to continue on the farm.
So because you mentioned that with the corn of the ecological disaster, that's interesting because what a lot of consumers, or I guess non-producers, view all the solars on farmland is an ecological disaster because of, storms wiping out the screens and what happens to the soil. I guess the biggest question is what these solar panels, what they might do to the soil and the biology under that. That seems to be the biggest concern. So I guess from the work that you're doing, is there any concerns that you see with that?
I can't really speak on it. Don't have the soil tests to say one way or the other. I haven't done enough research on my own. I know that the arguments of the panels breaking and putting all these heavy metals into the soil isn't realistic. Modern panels are silicon. They're not a legitimate issue. Biggest issue with panel breaking is the broken glass. The far bigger hazard across the entire site is the power that's getting produced, because these things are producing an awful lot of power. And if you get wrapped up in one of those wires that's bare, you will get an incredible amount of power running through you. But I mean, what I see on the site is that looking just across the fence from what is a very, very lush, high legume pasture, lots of natives, tons and tons of coneflower on the site. Plenty of rodents going through. It's just crazy the number of insects that are on site. You always see raptors sitting on the fence posts the whole way around. Plenty of snakes. I've had one guy that's got sprayed by skunks a couple of times over there mowing. The wildlife on the site, I mean, it's just night and day difference between what is under those panels compared to just across the fence, what is monocrop corn. And the farmers over there do an absolute excellent job by modern standards of corn production. They till the hell out of that soil. They work it 3 or 4 times. They have the stuff leveled up. I mean, you could roll a golf ball across their fields before the thing is planted. Completely flat, completely even soil. And they produce a very, very nice looking corn crop. If you think that is what a nice looking corn crop is, when it is completely straight rows of just perfect corn and absolutely nothing else growing out there. I think that there are opportunities to do a lot better than that within the confines of corn production. But the reality is that in the vast majority of cases, it's not. Here in northern Indiana, the whole hour-and-a-half drive that I have to the solar site, there's some Amish operations that have some animals outside. They have their horses, they have their chickens, they have whatnot. But it's completely insignificant on an acreage basis compared to all of the monocrop corn and soy. And it's difficult to see. It's difficult. Dad always says that the biggest exports from rural America have been the topsoil and the next generation. And I see those monocrop operations as being the worst example of that. That when they're, heavy tillage, you can see the washouts that are going right into the culverts, right into the ditches that are in the same field where they have center pivot irrigation. And none of their kids come back. It's continually becoming a system of maybe the farmer still owns the land, but he's no longer the one that farms it. He's leasing it out to somebody else. There are 3 or 4 crop operations in our area that farm all of the ground.
Wow. I didn't even think about that, to where the farmer is no longer the farmer. So that's kind of just leaving me speechless. So I just had a question too with the solar grazing, but specifically with the companies that you work with. What's that process like? Because that's another thing too, is I'm sure there's some good solar companies out there, but I've also know that there's a lot of bad players out there, because I've read actual stories on that. And that's also what makes it so muddy from my perspective to try to figure out, because I'm not, again, doing any of the solar grazing. I'm not actually trying to work with them. So I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, man, I'm sure that there are good and bad ones out there. We've had very little experience with any companies, only working with one company right now.
Okay.
And they have been absolutely fabulous through the whole process. I didn't do a lot of the negotiations prior to going on site, and all of the persistence to get us the contract that has allowed us on site. Dad did all of that. The since being there, they were very receptive during the construction process of the things that we would need to be able to graze the site correctly. They allowed us to make some decisions on the seed mix, to give some input there. They've been very, very conscious of their efforts in order to have these things be grazable appropriately. And it's a better environment for grazing at the solar site, I believe, than what it is here, because the sheep constantly have shade. They've got more protection than what they would here. And the vegetation on site has been absolutely awesome. That shading effect has worked absolute wonders for keeping the forage well vegetative far longer than what I'd be able to do here.
Are there any natural predators for the sheep around this area, to where are those solar panels protecting them from predators too?
There are fox and coyotes. We haven't seen any issues either here or at the solar site with them. Have seen plenty of fox at the site. We've seen a few coyotes there. But I'm of the opinion that we are the intruders into the area. I always used to say that on our chickens, that we undeniably had hawks and eagles and everything that were coming by taking chickens. We saw several of them, but if you've got 20,000 chickens in the field and you lose 5 a day, yeah, that sucks. But who's in the wrong here? Are we in the wrong for putting birds outside? Are we in the wrong for raising chickens to begin with? Is the hawk in the wrong for coming and stealing chickens that aren't his? I don't have a great answer on that, but I don't think that, there are predators around. We could take some mitigation strategies, could get a livestock guardian dog or anything, but so far haven't seen the need to do so. Haven't had any that I've noticed be taken and eaten or leaving parts around or anything. Wouldn't surprise me if we've had some lambs that have gone missing, but if they're taking a lamb a year and they're eating the thing, I'm not too worried about it.
And then going back to whenever you all signed the contract with the solar company that you're working with, and then you're mentioning how they allowed you to, really help out trying to build out the strategy around the solar farm essentially. And then you mentioned that there's a mix that you planted. Was that correct?
They seeded the site, but we got to give them input on the actual plant species that they were putting into that mix. Interesting.
So that's just interesting that they were very receptive and listening. That I can really get behind. Because again, it's interesting. I read a lot on social media just overall with agriculture, but then things like solar panels, which is a very polarizing topic, because there's parts of the world to where there's some farmers that are being completely squeezed out by solar companies, but then there's ones like this to where it's actually pretty legit. And also the fact that a lot of farmland is not even being used currently. And so whenever you can have those solar panels there, at least you can still do some type of agriculture there. And like you just mentioned, all of the wildlife there compared to your neighbors is pretty drastic. And that's telling in itself. Because I always go back to, when thinking of wildlife, I always go back to Will Harris's book, A Bold Return to Give a Damn. He always talks about how he completely forgot how much wildlife he had on his farm until he switched to regenerative, because he used to go out every single day looking for stuff to kill with whatever pesticide or insecticide, herbicide, all of those. And it seems like that's a lot different there. And you also mentioned too, I forgot that there was like a row of yellow. You mentioned this before the podcast. Can you?
So I think that is in part due to the pushback of rural America and of the ecological the ecologically minded, a lot of these sites have a requirement or at least have a strong expectation or a marketing benefit in order to plant some natives on site. The site that we're on, they put, I can't imagine how many dollars they spent in seed. I've looked a few different times on planting some natives here, and the native seed, might be 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 a pound, whereas, you can get, say, red clover for $3 a pound. So the price disparity is just absolutely huge. They put their money where their mouth is, planted tons and tons of natives out on site. And right now there are spots that the coneflower is all in bloom. And I mean, it's literally all you can see is just solid yellow. Walking through it, your boots end up all full of bugs and all the bees buzzing around and everything. It's really, really cool to see. I mean, I think that's probably more of the exception than the rule when it comes to solar sites. But the site that we're on is beautiful.
Well, you also said a really great point too, that you don't know if you're for or against solar panels, but you are for solar grazing. And I wholeheartedly, I think that's the best statement I've heard on this whole topic.
Right. I think it's very, very disappointing from my perspective to see the discussions that happen regarding solar panels. It's as though all of rural America is just convinced, hey, it's solar, it's bad. They'd see your camper out there with solar panels on top and be like, oh, solar panels, bad. And it's just stupid, in my opinion, that if we're going to have discussions about this, like, let's talk about why it's bad. Is it bad because it's corporate consolidation, because these are big companies coming into the area that are taking wealth away? Well, what are we saying about ADM? What are we saying about JBS, about Smithfield, about what's happening on the opposite side of the fence? What's happening today rather than the perspective of what might happen tomorrow with these solar contracts? Are we worried about the next generation having an opportunity on the land? Because I really don't see other farming operations around that have an opportunity for the next generation to come back. Are we worried about the ecological implications? Because if you go walk through a cornfield, it's not a good ecological, there are no good ecological implications that are happening on the vast majority of the corn acres in this country. Are we worried about the energy? Because the majority of that corn is going into ethanol anyway. So if we would have these nuanced discussions, I think that we would start talking about, or at least thinking about, the implications of what is currently happening on the ground rather than what the perspective is for these solar panels that may or may not come in. And it doesn't make sense to me that we're not talking about the issues that are occurring and how we can actually fix these issues. And instead, we're just complaining about what additional issues might pop up or what different issues that, in my opinion, aren't all that different than what we see already.